They say the wedding night is when a man becomes a husband. But for Daniel, that night became the moment he stopped believing in love. What he walked into was not an argument, not a misunderstanding, but a secret that had been growing quietly, right inside the home that raised him. And the woman at the center of it all was the last person he ever suspected. Stay with me till the end, because the truth behind this story will challenge everything you believe about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Why did the bride look afraid instead of surprised? Why did the woman who raised him refuse to speak? How long had this secret been hiding in plain sight? And was the wedding ever meant to happen? Some betrayals don't happen overnight. They grow silently, feeding on trust until the moment they finally surface and shatter everything you thought you knew. Daniel Morris was 9 years old when his world collapsed. His parents died in a highway collision on a rainy November evening, the kind of accident that makes the local news for one night and then disappears into public memory. But for Daniel, that night never ended. He was pulled from school by a social worker, handed a trash bag with his belongings, and told he'd be placed in temporary care. Temporary turned into 6 months. 6 months turned into a year. And just when Daniel started to believe he'd age out of the system without ever feeling home again, Margaret Whitmore entered his life. Margaret was 53 at the time, a retired schoolteacher with a large, quiet house on the edge of town. She had never married, never had children of her own, but she had a reputation in the community as someone who cared. When she applied to become a foster parent, the agency didn't hesitate. Daniel moved into her home on a cold Saturday in March, clutching a pillow his mother had sewn for him years before. Margaret stood in the doorway with a soft smile and said, "You're safe now." And for the first time in over a year, Daniel believed someone. Margaret gave him structure. She woke him at 6:30 every morning, made him breakfast, checked his homework, and insisted he read for 30 minutes before bed. She enrolled him in youth soccer, attended every game, and clapped louder than any other parent on the sidelines. She wasn't warm in the way his mother had been. She didn't hug him often or tell him she loved him. But she was present. She was steady. And to a boy who had lost everything, that was enough. By the time Daniel turned 18, he didn't see Margaret as a foster parent anymore. He saw her as the woman who saved him. He called her family. Daniel went to community college, studied business administration, and worked part-time at a hardware store to help with expenses. Margaret never asked him for rent, but he insisted on contributing. He mowed the lawn, fixed the plumbing, painted the shutters. He wanted to show her that her investment in him hadn't been wasted. And when he met Clara Jennings at 24, he brought her home to meet Margaret within 3 months. Clara was 23, a substitute teacher with dark curly hair and a laugh that made people lean in closer. She was kind without trying to be, the type of person who remembered your coffee order and asked how your day went like she actually wanted to know. Margaret liked her immediately, or at least, that's what Daniel thought. Margaret smiled when Clara visited, asked her thoughtful questions, and even invited her to stay for dinner on multiple occasions. Clara fit into the house easily, helping with dishes, complimenting Margaret's cooking, listening to her stories about Daniel as a boy. It felt natural. It felt right. So when Daniel proposed to Clara on a hiking trail overlooking the valley, and she said yes with tears in her eyes, he couldn't wait to tell Margaret. She hugged him that night, something she rarely did, and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Daniel thought he had finally built the life he was supposed to have. A woman he loved, a home that felt whole, and a mother figure who approved of it all. What Daniel didn't know was that approval had conditions, and those conditions had been quietly shaping Clara's life for months. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The wedding was small, 30 guests, a backyard ceremony under string lights. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd found at a consignment shop, and Daniel wore the same suit he'd worn to his college graduation. Margaret sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, watching with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. The ceremony went smoothly. Vows were exchanged. Rings were slipped on. Clara kissed him softly, and everyone clapped. It should have been the happiest day of his life. The reception lasted until 10. Guests left in waves, hugging the newlyweds and wishing them well. By 11, the house was quiet. Daniel and Clara had planned to stay the night at Margaret's before leaving for a weekend honeymoon the next morning. It was practical. The house was big enough. Margaret had insisted. Clara had agreed, though Daniel noticed she'd been unusually quiet during the reception. He'd asked her twice if she was okay, and both times she'd smiled and said she was just tired. Around midnight, Daniel realized he'd left his phone in the guest wing where they'd been getting ready earlier. Clara had already gone upstairs to their room. Daniel walked down the hallway, his dress shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. The house felt different at night. Bigger, emptier. He reached the guest wing and pushed open the door. That's when he heard it. Voices. Low. Muffled. Coming from the room next door. Margaret's study. Daniel froze. One of the voices was Clara's. The other was Margaret's. But it wasn't the kind of conversation you have after a wedding. It wasn't congratulatory or light. It was tense. Strained. Intimate in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. He stepped closer to the door. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in the tone stopped him. He heard Clara's voice first, shaking. I can't keep doing this. Then Margaret's, firmer. You're scared. That's normal. But we've talked about this. Clara again, barely audible. He's your son. Margaret's reply came quick and cold. He's not my son. He's a boy I raised. There's a difference. Daniel's hand was on the doorknob before he realized what he was doing. He turned it slowly. The door creaked open, and what he saw in that moment would replay in his mind for years. Margaret and Clara were sitting close together on the love seat in the study. Too close. Margaret's hand was resting on Clara's knee. Clara's face was turned away, but her shoulders were trembling. Margaret looked up when the door opened. Her expression didn't change. She didn't pull her hand away. She just stared at Daniel with a calm, almost defiant look, as if she'd been expecting him. Clara gasped and stood up quickly, her face flushed, eyes wide with something between guilt and fear. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. This was the woman who raised him. This was the woman he just married. And they were here, together, in the middle of the night, on his wedding night. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was steady. Daniel, close the door. But Daniel didn't move. He just stared. And in that silence, the life he thought he'd built began to crumble. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the bed in the upstairs guest room while Clara stayed downstairs. She tried to explain, tried to follow him, but he'd told her not to. He needed space. He needed air. He needed anything other than the suffocating weight pressing down on his chest. By the time the sun came up, Daniel had made a decision. The wedding was over. Not just the ceremony. The marriage. Everything. He told Clara the next morning in the kitchen. She cried. She tried to explain again, but her words came out in fragments that didn't make sense. She kept saying it wasn't what it looked like, but she couldn't explain what it actually was. Margaret wasn't there. She'd left early, claiming she had errands to run. Daniel didn't believe her. He packed Clara's things and his own. They left separately. No honeymoon. No goodbyes. Just silence and the faint smell of coffee that neither of them had drunk. The days that followed were a fog. Daniel moved into a friend's apartment and ignored the dozens of calls from family members asking what happened. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't even fully understand it himself. Clara tried reaching out twice. The first time, she sent a long text message apologizing and asking to talk. The second time, she showed up at his work. Daniel refused both times. He couldn't look at her without seeing that room. That moment. That hand on her knee. Margaret didn't reach out at all. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. Then, one evening, Daniel received a voicemail. Her voice was calm, measured, as if nothing had happened. She said they needed to talk, that he was overreacting, that he didn't understand the full picture. Daniel deleted the message halfway through. He didn't want the full picture. He wanted to forget the picture existed. But forgetting wasn't possible. Because the more Daniel thought about it, the more details started surfacing. Little moments he'd ignored before. The way Margaret always asked about Clara when she wasn't around. The way she'd insisted Clara come over for dinner, even on nights Daniel couldn't make it. The way Clara had started dressing differently after spending time with Margaret, more conservatively, more like someone trying to impress. Daniel had thought it was Clara trying to bond with his family. Now he wasn't sure what it was. 3 weeks after the wedding, Daniel got a call from Clara's younger sister, Emily. She'd heard about the separation and wanted to check on him. They met for coffee. Emily was hesitant at first, stirring her drink and avoiding eye contact. Then she said something that changed everything. Clara told me she felt trapped. Daniel frowned. Trapped how? Emily looked up. She said Margaret made her feel like she owed her something. Like if she didn't keep her happy, Margaret would turn you against her. Daniel felt his throat tighten. When did this start? Emily hesitated. Months ago. Maybe longer. Clara didn't tell me everything. But she said Margaret would text her late at night. Ask her to come over when you weren't there. And Clara went because she thought it was important to you. She thought Margaret was testing her. Daniel's hands clenched around his cup. Testing her for what? Emily shook her head. I don't know. But Clara was scared of her. She just didn't know how to tell you. That conversation stayed with Daniel for days. He started piecing things together. The late-night texts. The private dinners. The way Clara had seemed more anxious the closer they got to the wedding. He'd thought it was normal pre-wedding jitters. But maybe it wasn't jitters. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what would happen if she didn't play along. Fear of losing Daniel. Fear of Margaret. For weeks after the wedding, Daniel went back to Margaret's house. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up, rang the doorbell, and waited. When Margaret opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She stepped aside and let him in without a word. They sat in the living room, the same room where they used to watch movies on Friday nights when Daniel was a teenager. Now it felt like a courtroom. Daniel spoke first. I need you to tell me the truth. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. About what? About Clara. About what's been going on. Margaret's expression didn't change. Nothing's been going on, Daniel. You walked in on a conversation and misunderstood it. Then explain it to me. She sighed. Clara was having doubts. She came to me because she didn't want to hurt you. I was trying to reassure her. Daniel's voice rose. By putting your hand on her knee? By meeting her alone in the middle of the night? Margaret's eyes hardened. You're being dramatic. Daniel stood up. I'm not doing this. I just need to know one thing. Did you manipulate her? Margaret didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was cold. I cared about her. I still do. But if she told you I forced her into anything, she's lying. Daniel stared at her. The woman who had raised him. The woman he'd trusted more than anyone. And in that moment, he realized he didn't know her at all. He left without another word. And he never went back. 2 months later, Daniel received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small leather journal and a handwritten note from Clara. The note was brief. It said, I'm sorry I couldn't say this in person, but you deserve to know the truth. Daniel sat down on his couch and opened the journal. The entries were dated over the span of 8 months. They started just after Daniel and Clara got engaged. The first few entries were innocent. Clara wrote about meeting Margaret for lunch, about how kind she seemed, about how much she wanted Margaret to like her. But around the 3rd month, the tone shifted. Clara wrote about how Margaret had started texting her privately, asking personal questions. About her family, her past relationships, her insecurities. Clara had thought it was Margaret trying to get to know her better. But then the questions became more invasive. Margaret asked about Clara's relationship with Daniel, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about other people. Clara wrote that she didn't know how to respond without sounding rude. By the 5th month, the entries became darker. Margaret had started inviting Clara over when Daniel wasn't home. At first, Clara went because she thought it was important. But Margaret's behavior began to change. She'd sit too close, touch Clara's arm when she spoke, compliment her appearance in ways that felt uncomfortable. Clara wrote that she didn't know if she was imagining it or if something was actually wrong. She was afraid to tell Daniel because she didn't want him to think she was overreacting. She didn't want to ruin his relationship with the woman who raised him. Then came the entry that made Daniel's blood run cold. It was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. Clara wrote, Margaret told me tonight that she loves me. Not like a mother-in-law. She said she's been in love with me for months. She said Daniel doesn't understand me the way she does. She said if I go through with the wedding, I'll regret it. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I don't want to lose Daniel, but I don't know how to tell him without destroying everything. The final entry was written the night of the wedding. I tried to tell her I can't do this anymore. She said I'm confused. She said I'm just nervous. She said we'll figure it out after the wedding. I don't know what that means. I don't know what she wants from me. I feel trapped. I feel like no matter what I do, I'm going to lose. Daniel closed the journal and sat in silence. He thought about every conversation he'd had with Margaret, every time she'd praised Clara, every time she'd encouraged their relationship, and he realized it had never been about supporting him. It had been about controlling Clara, about keeping her close, about creating a situation where Clara felt indebted, afraid, and unable to leave. The woman who had saved Daniel's childhood had spent months emotionally manipulating the woman he loved, and Daniel had been blind to all of it. Daniel didn't confront Margaret again. There was no point. He'd already seen who she really was. Instead, he focused on rebuilding. He moved into his own apartment, started therapy, and slowly reconnected with friends he'd pushed away during the chaos. It wasn't easy. Some days he woke up angry. Other days he woke up sad. But he kept moving forward. Clara reached out one more time, 6 months after the wedding. She asked if they could meet. Daniel agreed. They sat in a quiet coffee shop on a gray afternoon, and for the first time since that night, Clara told him everything. She explained how Margaret had made her feel special at first, then slowly isolated her, then made her feel like she owed her something. Clara said she'd been so afraid of losing Daniel that she didn't realize she was losing herself. She apologized, not for what happened, but for not being strong enough to stop it sooner. Daniel listened, and when she finished, he told her the truth. He didn't blame her. He blamed Margaret, but he also couldn't go back. Too much had been broken. Too much trust had been destroyed. Clara nodded. She said she understood. They hugged in the parking lot, and then they went their separate ways. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined, but it was the ending they both needed. Years passed. Daniel eventually started dating again. He learned to trust slowly, carefully, and only after seeing someone's actions over time. He never spoke to Margaret again. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a different town, that she'd become more reclusive, that she rarely left her house. Part of him felt sad for her, but a bigger part of him felt relief. Relief that he'd gotten out. Relief that Clara had gotten out. Relief that the cycle had ended. Clara, too, found her own path. She went back to school, became a full-time teacher, and eventually met someone who respected her boundaries and treated her with kindness. She didn't talk about Margaret. She didn't talk about the wedding. She just moved forward, one day at a time, rebuilding the parts of herself that had been taken. And Daniel learned something in those years. Something painful, but necessary. Not everyone who rescues you is meant to stay in your life forever. Some people save you because they genuinely care. Others save you because they want control. And the hardest lesson of all is learning to tell the difference before it's too late. Love without boundaries becomes possession, and possession always destroys. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were Daniel? Would you have confronted Margaret immediately, or would you have walked away like he did? Do you believe betrayal is worse when it comes from someone you consider family? How would you feel if the person who raised you turned out to be the person who hurt you the most? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If this story made you think, made you feel something, or reminded you of the importance of protecting your boundaries, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because every week, we bring you real stories that reveal the hidden truths of human nature. Stories that make you question, reflect, and understand the world a little better. And next time, we're telling the story of a man who inherits a house from a distant relative. Everything seems normal until he discovers a locked door in the basement. And what's behind that door will change everything he thought he knew about his family. You won't want to miss it. Until then, take care of yourself. Protect your peace. And remember, not everyone who says they love you actually knows how.